Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present to you Senator Torres, who's going to talk to us about some of the challenges facing government today.
Well, thank you, Michael. The only correction I have is I no longer sit on the board of Covered California, but I did sit on those other boards, which I think is important because many of your participants are coming from those areas: transit, higher education, healthcare. When I served on the Board of Regents of the University of California, our budget was about $41 billion in 2023. That budget included many hospitals, which were severely challenged during the COVID pandemic. I also served as the first vice chair of our California Stem Cell Agency, approved by the voters for $5 billion in research for stem cell research, which has been going on, and we're finding cures year by year as researchers are being given grants. But when I served on the San Francisco Municipal Agency, Transportation Agency, and the PUC, their budgets were about equal in scope, about 1.5 billion. I say that because the challenges that many of the people who are on this call are affecting those institutions, especially as we look into the next 7 years up to 2030. We're going to see major changes happening in our society and in our economics, and clearly that involves institutions that have to be ready and prepared to respond to the growing changes. And one of those changes is the aging population. As a member of the baby boomer generation, we had a major impact in terms of employment, in terms of the economy. But now we're retiring, and we're having an impact on the pensions and on Social Security. What are going to be the potential resolutions to those issues as we move forward? Because we're going to have to deal with new debt levels. We're going to have to deal with not only Social Security, but how do we include immigrant populations? That is that young population that contributes now currently and must continue to contribute in order to keep Social Security solvent. The other, of course, is Medicare. As we begin to look at the impact of Medicare solutions and cures and disease-oriented approaches, we need to make sure that we're ready to meet those challenges. And clearly we saw the pension issue being raised during the Hollywood writers' strike. Here we have, and now the actors are beginning to look at how they're going to resolve their issues. But again, it comes down to those very challenging issues of age, those challenging issues of employment and workers, and just where we're going to move in that direction, especially with AI and automation coming into the picture. These institutions are going to have to be much more flexible in terms of dealing with the increasing productivity that automation can bring, but also the impact of eliminating millions of jobs that we saw during the Industrial Revolution, from farm to cities, where farming jobs were diminished and industrial jobs occurred. That was a major transition for our society, the industrialization and the industrial age. Now we're seeing a very different age, and that is the age of automation. Robots, where are they going to be picking the tomatoes, the vegetables, the fruits? How are they going to phase out farm workers, for example, which will have an impact in terms of the cost of food for all of us, and eliminating those millions of jobs? We figure automation will probably eliminate about 40 million by the end of 2030. How are we going to replace those jobs, and with what skills, is going to be a major challenge to our educational institutions. Here in California, we passed a law in 2014 that allowed for the first time for community colleges to offer BA and BS degrees, four-year degrees. That has proven to be very beneficial for those who couldn't afford to go to a state university or UC campus in California. But because they could afford the community college fees, here they had an opportunity to gain access to BA and BSs in various fields, from bioscience to engineering to social science, and be able to enter the workforce much more quickly than they would have otherwise. So government intervention is important, as an important concept, as we're dealing with not only automation, but as we're dealing with the need for more jobs with more training, et cetera. And part of that is the imbalance of diversity and inclusion and gender. When we look at those factors, which now many of the corporations in America are incorporating into best practices, is how do we increase that gender identification and support for women in the workforce? For example, today, 75% of women who are eligible to work are working. But are they getting the best wages? Are they getting the most competitive environment? Are they getting the most benefits? That's an issue that we really have to address, because we still have a wage differential which disastrously affects women, and it shouldn't be so. So as we look at gender disparity, as we look at inclusion and diversity, That's part also for people of color trying to enter the workforce, but more importantly, how do they escalate to other management positions that are important for their income? And clearly, the greatest changes that we're going to see is in those areas, especially in the 2020s, as we begin to look at the impact not only of automation, but just what the impact has had of China and India coming into the picture in terms of inequality and historic peaks of industrialization from those two countries. And now they're forming clearly a problem in terms of international security, as we've seen in the Taiwan Straits and other parts of the world. But challenging and regulating macroeconomic environment is going to be very important for institutions. And that's where you all come in as transit authority, as a university higher education authority. All these challenges are coming to your footstep. And that's why I think that, quite frankly, the importance of scenario analysis, as I've seen it operate, for me in any way, has been very, very beneficial, because it gives us an opportunity to really identify the variables that affect outcomes, and how we begin to do that by having the most information in front of us, and not just a straight line graph that gives us nothing but numbers and no posits in terms of future outcomes. And so as we begin to look at those diversities, we also see the benefit. For example, there's been a challenge with a lot of the stem cell grafts that we provided in California, that the clinical trials aren't including enough diversity or gender. And we now realize that a lot of the diseases that we're dealing with can be gender specific and diversity specific, whereas one cure may work for one group of people, but may not. But if you don't include a diversity of clinical trial participants, how are you going to make that determination to make sure you got the right elements to a potential cure? We also realize that the more education a person has, the longer they live. And this is the other issue, which is affecting us, longevity. We're seeing an increase in that, but we're also seeing the latest report that I just saw this week that indicates that we are decreasing in longevity, and a lot of it due to diseases that we never knew about. COVID obviously was a vivid example of that and a challenge to longevity, and we're probably going to see other diseases that will have an impact on reducing the life potential of people living in this world. But when you look at all of those factors, the rising investments in terms of infrastructure is going to have an impact on the electric grid, which utilities are going to have to be looking at much more carefully. We're doing that here in California with Pacific Gas and Electric, trying to figure out how many lines can be put underground to avoid wildfires, what impact are outages going to have on residents, and clearly what climate change has to do with us. As a member of the PUC board, one of the major decisions we had to deal with, how high should those seawalls be? Because we're seeing now in California and in San Francisco, where salt water is penetrating the drinking water utilization within the city. Not disastrous yet, but if we don't take steps to improve that ability to have a pristine water system, San Francisco gains its drinking water from the Yosemite Valley through a series of pipes that goes through the mountains all the way down to San Francisco and the Bay Area. But how are those water distribution elements going to be coordinated and protected, especially with the rising sea levels? Again, with climate change, it has an impact in terms of our public health, but also our telecommunications. How are we going to be dealing with that? Where are we going to have access for people to go to for those important elements? As we see now in terms of California, at least from my perspective here, the challenges that we're facing are basically state workers and their pensions. And how are we going to be able to finance that as the aging population increases in a state and in our nation? And how is the Congress going to deal with of course, Medicare and Medicaid, but also more importantly with Social Security to make sure we have a base? And I believe that the scenario analysis gives us an opportunity on a case-by-case basis to glean more information that will be helpful to decision making, and clearly glean more information that'll help us to achieving our goals as we move forward. At the end of the day, however, I think I see a bright future for us as long as we're able to adjust to all of these factors: the aging population, automation, longevity, the increased workforce by immigrant populations, and making sure that we provide for diversity, inclusion, and gender modifications and opportunities, and how all of those factors can lead to the tremendous needs that we have ahead for infrastructure needs, for building, for capital needed for housing for students across the state and across the nation. All of those are challenges which are formidable, but not insurmountable. Thank you.
Yeah, Senator, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated.
You
Really
bet.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.